voice and character for Kermit the Frog on this past Friday. It was I lived in LA for 9 years. It was the most Hollywood experience, most wonderful experience I've had. The reason I bring this up is one of the things Steve said, and Steve's been working with the Henson Company for years. He was in the Dark Crystal. One of the things he was saying was of the reality of the puppets and how to keep that impression alive, that impression of life. And really, when we talk about an impression of life, immediately when human beings associate with another animal, with a dolphin, with a monkey, we're recreating our morality in them, our code of ethics, as it were. The only, it's a facade, really. The only difference between, a machine, your toaster, for example, and what you think is a living thing is a sexy voice and a pair of googly eyes. I mean, that's basically what Steve was trying to say to me. So this is always going to be an interesting conversation. Whether AI is going to become developed enough that it's going to be asking the question why. I mean, really, it's not going to be a question of logic. It's going to be a question of illogic. That's how we kind of separate ourselves. I mean, there certainly will be a time where human beings, the human being in the next room will be tricked by the ELIZA program or whatever, be like, I'm sure that's another person in that other room, and they open it up, and sure enough, it's, a mainframe. And it's like, well, yeah, P.T. Barnum would tell you the easiest thing is to trick another human being. But in terms of actual reality, when we will look at a toaster and say, oh my God, this toaster has a soul, I can't possibly do it harm, it is another sentient being.
Unless it's the toaster from Woodruff.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. I don't think we'll really ever get to that point, and if it does, it'll be like a short circuit thing where we won't be able to understand its soul any more than we're able to understand our own souls.
Okay, we have a. Sorry. Let's just. That gentleman in the back was holding his hand up very patiently.
Well, souls bespeak or comes from a basis of spirituality. Spirituality in itself is an advanced concept. You could almost say an evolutionary concept of sentience, self-awareness, or intelligence. So at some point, when we were just bipedal apes walking around, an evolutionary leap took place, and we asked the question, where am I, who am I, where did I come from, and why am I here? At some point, perhaps artificially intelligent robots or toasters will develop that stage.
But then there are toasters anymore.
What are we? We're just biological toasters.
I mean, if they become self-aware and they have a sense of self-preservation and they question their existence, they're sentient.
But does that mean that they have a soul?
And they still can't make toast.
Well, I should say
You'd think they'd be proud of being able to make toast if they understood what it was.
Toast
Look what a good job I do here.
Again, I go back to Red Dwarf.
Toast is to them would be as tool making is to us. That separates us from dolphins and
I mean, that's still a question that we're asking ourselves. Do we really have souls, or is this just a concept that we've created to answer a question that we don't have an answer to?
So is an atheist no better than a toaster then, because they don't believe in a soul?
I think Chris touched on something too, and we don't have to go deeper into it, but I think the illogic of our nature is probably closer to touching the idea of a soul. Because all things being equal, if you look at us just, linearly and logically, there shouldn't be this extra thing that book's talking about and the asking why.
I think when a toaster asks if it has a soul, it's a fairly good indication that it might indeed have one. Until then, you probably can say it doesn't.
Okay, but then that begs the other side of the question. Will we recognize it as sentience, and what do we do with the discovery that they're now sentient?
As long as it makes toast, I don't care.
Well, then do they become our maids and workers in factories, and basically aren't we creating a slave race by
That depends what kind of weaponry we've built into that toaster, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you've been waiting.
Yeah, well, something we've been sort of dancing around is the fact that, well, we evolved through one of our major motivations was simple survival. If this intelligent computer is sitting in a nice safe lab nothing really ever really goes wrong.
Is it surrounded by humans?
Are you calling it a computer, or are you
Our
calling?
computer or robot or whatever, as long as how quickly will it evolve? I mean, our major means of evolution was because of survival.
Correct.
It's surrounded by
and
humans.
intelligence was just one part of that.
Yeah.
We had a whole bag of tricks.
It's surrounded by humans. It'll have more than enough trauma, difficulty, and incompetence to make sure it evolves.
Maybe your side of the family.
The computer program's only as good as its programmer. So what we put in, and then they learn from that, which they'll learn from us, from watching us in the first place.
But it's a great point. You know, in other words, if we are here because we have survived, we're the ones who actually made it out of the primordial soup all the way to this point. Magnum, Cro-Magnon, neocortex, all of that. A computer that doesn't have to survive, but is simply given, you know, what to work with, you know, is survivability and survival necessary for ultimate, evolution?
Well, that's a...
No, go ahead. I was just
Sorry, I was doing the British queuing thing where my thought was already full before yours was finished. Just to talk about a point that Mrs. Arlene was brought up, which is about learning. I mean, you know, even the Roomba right now has a learning aspect to it, where we'll learn, you know, completely autonomously the layout of your floors and stuff like that. And I wouldn't say that it suddenly has a soul, because it does a really good job polishing, you know, my hardwood floors, which it doesn't. But I think, you know, an interesting talking point would be, what would be the context, the environment in which an artificial intelligent being would develop some sense of self-awareness, of a sense of mortality, even if it's, you know, battery life has a, you know, 10 years lifespan, if it's only things like that.
In a nice safe room, and like you're saying.
Or would it develop it by itself?
Right.
I mean, would we develop a soul? Would one person growing up alone in the woods think of the concept of a soul, or is that something that is culturally taught?
Well, for example, right now, there currently is in development and may already be being used, are little bitty creatures about yay big that are just being designed to go into destroyed buildings and stuff like that to look for survivors. And they are given a program. I don't know if it's necessarily a neural network or not, but it's a learning system for them. They know the basic structures, but they don't know of the building before it collapsed. But after, they have to crawl in there, and they have to find their way and recognize a human being and relay that information back to the people who are waiting for the information. Now that's currently, I don't know, is that exist today? I know I saw something on it, but...
Yeah, there's numerous robots being developed with that. The government has a few that they're actually, I believe, using in the Middle East to go into rubble buildings, and then there are also snake robots, I know, being developed to get into tight corners and stuff like that.
They have to learn. They have to be able to survive, to be able to find the people, and they're taught to be able to think their way out of tight spaces. Now that's a very, very minimal amount of intelligence they need to acquire to survive and relay that information back. But they still have to learn that from experience. Now what's the difference between, besides the fact that they don't have a human brain, what's the difference between a child learning not to touch a stove and the consequences of what will happen if that happens, and this mechanical creature that's got a system that teaches it to survive and find human beings to save them.
Well, all that robot has done is mimicked one area of our survivability.
Right.
So again, when we get
But it's a beginning, is what I'm saying.
Right.
So.
I know the Japanese had this little round ball robot with a camera in it and everything. They developed it after their big earthquake, and they put it into the collapsed buildings and roll around, and it had to have the intelligence to figure out if there was enough room for a person to be where it was looking, and it goes around and hunts for people in rubble and collapsed buildings.
Okay, so let's, what we're going to do is wrap up this topic by everybody having closing statements before we move into the